sits about 273 miles southeast of Portland, Oregon, near the Umatilla National Forest. The elevation of Ritter is about 2,549 feet, so it's not too high above sea level relative to the area around it. It is an unincorporated town, which, Mike, do you know what that means?
Very few people live there.
Well, that is the case, but so few people live there that there is no post office.
Oh, yeah.
To be incorporated, there has to be a post office in your town.
I did not know that, but I did read that at one point Ritter did have a post office, but then they lost it.
That's too bad. So the climate of Ritter, its coldest months are December and January, as you'd expect, when the nighttime temperatures average about 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmest months are July and August, where the daytime temps reach about 88 Fahrenheit. So very typical northwestern atmosphere. Dry throughout most of the year, not too much going on. And the terrain in the Umatilla National Forest is the Blue Mountains of northeast Oregon and southeast Washington, and cover an area of 1.4 million acres. Some interesting facts about the forest. The explorers Lewis and Clark passed through the area in 1805, and thousands of immigrants would later follow the Oregon Trail west, with many of them remaining in the Blue Mountain region.
Everybody who played Oregon Trail growing up, if you died and never made it to the end, this is where you would have gone.
Yep, this is where you win if you didn't die of dysentery on the way.
Yeah.
So, in 1851, gold was discovered in the region, and by the end of the gold boom, over $10 million in gold and silver were mined from the area. So that's $10 million in 1851. So that's a significant section of the area where the people actually made money. Mm-hmm. Remnants of the gold boom are still visible today in the National Forest. There are even some active claims still getting mined. So there's a lot of gold in this area.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about the climate of the area is, like Joe said, it's typically pretty dry, but actually 2019 was one of the wettest years they had on record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had almost 42 inches of rain and 205 inches of snow, which if you go and look at their averages is way, way, way above what they normally average in the area. So, yeah, they had a really wet year. And no reason why that I could read, but just interesting.
That's awesome. That's a lot of snow.
Yeah, that's a ton of snow.
That's a ton. So just to give you an idea of the animals that are in the area: moose, bighorn sheep, black bear, mountain goats, mule deer, white-tailed deer, timber wolves, cougars, coyotes. So a lot of big game. Mm-hmm. And we don't see that in a lot of the areas we follow, but out there it's healthy, lush, lots of vegetation, so you get some bigger game.
And definitely, a couple animals that I would worry about if I had small children hiking with me.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously,
the
wolves and cougars. And obviously, black bears are, I'm less worried about a black bear versus a grizzly, but they're still a large predatory animal.
Especially if you're young and a young child out by yourself.
Yeah.
So 20% of the forest is actually designated as a wilderness zone. And area is generally rugged and mountainous. The peaks in the area approaching 9,000 feet. So you don't really have stuff going above tree line, but you still have altitude as a factor.
So, and I just want to, people might be wondering why we're talking about this national forest when the case happened in Ritter. Ritter is private property, but it's near this forest. So this forest is a good representation of the terrain and climate that Keith would have encountered in Ritter.
Yeah, and it gives you an idea, and I think people could imagine, just they've always seen pictures of like lush Oregon forests.
Yeah.
So I mean that's kind of what it like comes to mind when I think of it. As far as exposure goes, with areas that are approaching 9,000 feet in some of the areas, and possibly, obviously, especially in 2019, heavy rain and snow, exposure is definitely a potential risk or concern in that area. Lack of shelter, I don't know, with much of the area is designated wilderness and it's all below tree line, you're not going to run into like actual built shelters, but it's not like you're completely exposed all the time.
Not all the time. I did look up, obviously tree line changes kind of depending on where you are. If you're in Colorado,
if there's no trees just growing.
Yeah, so in the Oregon area, you kind of start to see trees disappear around the 6,500 to 7,000 feet range. So,
okay.
Yeah, so depending on what elevation you're at, you may be above the tree line. So,
wow.
And that does change. I know in Colorado it's much higher.
Yeah, it's like almost 11,000 feet in the Rockies.
Yeah, and even when we were in Mount Rainier, it was near 9,000 feet was the tree line there. So it really varies depending on where you're at.
That's crazy. I kind of want to know. I want to know more about that. I want to learn about that when we get off of here to find out because that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
Because there's like, when you get up to like 10,500 feet in Colorado, you start getting those, like the full growth of the tree is like 3 feet tall. You get like those little, and that's as big as they'll get. But that's like 3,000 feet higher up than this is.
I imagine it has to do probably something with the amount of rain they get.
Rain, or if it's like battered with wind and something just can't stay up at that altitude, maybe.
I know this area in Oregon is drier, so I have a feeling that probably plays a role in where the tree line ends. I know Colorado, gets a lot more precipitation.
Oh, Mike, I have a theory that the Russians might be happy with. I wonder if they're getting those mountain hurricanes up there.
Right? That is an episode for or a topic for another episode.
Yeah, I know, right? For those of you that think I'm crazy, I'm not. It's the Russian government that's crazy. When we did our Dyatlov Pass episode, one of the theories mentioned as to why the group went missing was that a hurricane got them in the mountains.
Yes. So if you want to hear some crazy theories, including mountain hurricanes, listen to our Dyatlov episode.
And that is how you plug your own podcast in your own podcast episode. All right. So I'll move on so we can get going. So difficulty in general, it's a heavily wooded, alpine, and mountainous area. So it's going to be typically high if you're out hiking, especially because when it's designated wilderness, that means unmanaged, basically. It's kind of like Bureau of Land Management stuff.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's wild. There might be some trails, but you're like more game trails or trails that people are making, but there's no rangers. There's none of that stuff going on like you'd see at a national park.
I looked up the trails in the national forest we're talking about, and most of the trails were moderate to high levels of difficulty. You can just picture a lot of ups and downs. The trails are probably not well maintained, so kind of rugged. Like we said, not a lot of shelters. So it's not, it's not going to be one of your more major national parks where there's well-defined flat trails that you can hike.
Yeah, you'll end up at a nice place where they're probably selling some water and food and all that other stuff. There's no services here. It's raw wilderness.